the joint South Korean-American annual military exercises as provocative and has threatened a preemptive nuclear strike. 25,000 US troops taking part in the exercises, due to end on September the 2nd. Exercises the North says are preparations for an invasion. North and South Korea are still technically at war, as an armistice ended their 1950-53 conflict, and they've been at daggers drawn ever since. North Korea made its position known in a communique published to coincide with the start of the exercises, and on Monday it also demanded South Korea return 12 North Korean waitresses who defected to the South, fleeing their North Korean restaurant in China earlier this year. Pyongyang alleges that the women were kidnapped, which Seoul denies. On Monday, South Korea's president said last week's defection to the South of North Korea's deputy ambassador in London was a sign that cracks were opening in Kim Jong-un's regime.
To intercept 3 Chinese warplanes in their air defense zone. This is a breaking story. Vasudan Siridan of the International Business Times just reported that it has come to light that South Korean forces scrambled fighter jets to escort 3 Chinese military planes after they entered an overlapping air defense zone. Now it says that the Chinese aircraft are reported to have flown into the airspace last Thursday on the 18th of August. So this is interesting that it's coming to light now. So often when these stories break, it's like the military has time to massage the information they want to release to the public, and then they finally let it out. So this is interesting. Anyway, it says here, August 18th is when it happened. It happened near South Korea's island of Jeju, and they did not alert authorities in Seoul. It says here, Beijing's aircraft, which included a bomber. Wow. So it wasn't just fighter jets, it was also a bomber, quickly left the airspace after South Korean authorities issued a warning, and then, of course, dispatched their own fighter jets. That's according to a source who was reported by South Korea's Yonhap news agency. They state that the aerial incident has occurred amid tensions between the two countries over their deployment of the sophisticated missile defense system, the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, otherwise known as the THAAD missile defense system in the Korean Peninsula. They also write here that Washington and Seoul have agreed to position the missile interceptor unit in South Korea in order to counter threats from North Korea, but China and Russia have vehemently opposed the move, stating that their territories would also fall under the THAAD radar. So, my friends, the way we're looking at this now, China sending up bombers and fighter jets to violate the air defense zone of a South Korean island is a major development given the fact of the tension already in the South China Sea. We're seeing China acting ever more aggressively and more bold in the region than ever before, especially with the new militarized, weaponized islands in the Chinese Triangle, the Spratly Island chain that we've been reporting, the constant growth and constant buildup of those islands, and the militarization and response by all the Asian nations surrounding who claim jurisdiction in those island chains. Of course, I'll run down the list. It's like a broken record. I mean, we've got the Philippines and the United States. They're reviving military bases. You've got the Vietnamese setting up anti-missile systems. You got Japan developing a new ballistic missile system as well, just for that very reason. And of course, China finally getting their aircraft carrier strike group online. And now, given the latest ballistic missile threats coming out of North Korea, South Korea launching a THAAD missile defense system, which threatens Russia and China. China, in turn, sends bombers and fighter jets to test the radar capabilities and defense capabilities of South Korea. It's like constant cat and mouse. I mean, this is really dangerous part of the world right now.
Saudi Arabia that had been helping the kingdom with its attacks on Yemen, as well as the report that other staff have been removed who apparently were not military, I think is more a political shell game where you put a peanut under a cup and you have several cups and you move them around on the table and you have to guess where the peanut is. And I think this is really hide the peanut because they might remove them from Saudi Arabia, but who's to say that this is not being conducted out of Washington, D.C., out of another country, all done electronically by email and by telephone? You don't have to physically have somebody in Saudi Arabia directing the war against Yemen, the war of aggression against Yemen. I think it's done as political theater in some ways because it looks bad for the Obama administration and the Democratic Party when they're charged with continuing warfare around the world by advocacy groups for human rights like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. And plain ordinary citizens. I think that this is going to go on in a low-key manner from somewhere else rather than perhaps Saudi Arabia. And I think that the U.S. is still going to keep arming the Saudis and replacing the bombs they're dropping on Yemen. This is, as the article noted, the United States has continued its unconditional support for the Saudi regime and its wars. Last year, they gave them more than $1 billion to buy weapons to rearm to rearm and replace what's been dropped on Yemen. So I feel that this is simply a game that's being played for the front page of a big major newspaper someplace rather than dealing with reality, because ultimately, if the United States really wanted to stop Saudi Arabia and its war in Yemen, it would stop arming Saudi Arabia, it would stop sending money to Saudi Arabia, it would stop permitting Saudis to come to the United States. It could break diplomatic relations with the Saudis. But basically, this is simply political theater, hide the peanut. It's a shell game, and it looks good on paper, and it looks good on the mainstream media in the United States, but in the end, nothing's going to change. I don't think anything really has changed. I think it's simply words that can be sold to Americans who believe implicitly whatever the American government tells them.
Tensions have flared on the Turkey-Syria border following the bombing of a Kurdish wedding in the nearby city of Gaziantep that killed 54 people. On Tuesday, 2 mortar rounds fired from an ISIL-controlled area in Syria hit the southeastern Turkish town of Karkamis. 3 others hit the center of the Turkish border town of Kilis. Turkish artillery responded by attacking 4 ISIL positions around the jihadist-controlled Syrian town of Jarablus with around 60 shells.
Involvement in a battle on 3 fronts. Commander Mohammed El-Falaki says it's overseeing militia, mostly made up of Shiite foreign fighters in Syria, Yemen, and Iraq.
So if any sectarian conflict is spread in the region, Iran can be one of the targets, and its own security would be a target to that. So Iran doesn't have any interest in following any approach for paying attention to sectarian conflict.
It's called the Liberation Army. It's thought to have as many as 200,000 foreign fighters. It's part of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard. It's fighting alongside troops backing President Bashar al-Assad in Syria, while in Iraq it's battling ISIL. And in Yemen, the Liberation Army is supporting Houthi rebels against forces aligned with President Abd Abu Mansur Hadi. A military official says Iran will supervise, train, and finance local forces. Iran's Revolutionary Guard was born out of the Islamic Revolution of 1979. Part of its mandate is to defend the country from threats beyond its borders, while upholding the revolution's ideals. Since it first deployed troops during the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, it has expanded its mission.
The revolution came with the promise to export what they call Islamic revolution to the world, especially to the neighborhood. Interestingly, that the neighborhood is Muslims. What they meant actually is Shiaism.
For decades, the Revolutionary Guard has been supplying weapons to Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza. Now the admission that Iran is involved in 3 active regional conflicts could have far-reaching consequences.
Bomber moments before he detonated his explosives. ABC's chief foreign correspondent Terry Moran with the images and the story of a father who sent in his son.
The drama unfolded on a darkened street in the city of Kirkuk in northern Iraq. 2 police officers desperately holding the suspect, arms outstretched. And he's just a kid, standing there stripped and scared. You can see the fear in his face. And strapped around his torso, the suicide bomb. Carefully, the bomb is removed. And the boy rushed to safety, surrounded. His cries piercing the night, and then into custody for questioning. His bomb detonated by an explosives team. He is 12, maybe 13 years old, police say, and he told police his own father, an ISIS commander, sent him and his brother on their suicide missions. His brother blew himself up elsewhere in the city. All this less than 24 hours after that horrific suicide bombing at a wedding in Turkey. The Turkish president saying the bomber there might have been as young as 12, but officials now hedging on that claim. There's a long and bloody history of using children as suicide bombers by ISIS, by the Taliban, by Boko Haram in Nigeria. The UN says the tactic is on the rise around the world.
Building in Hasaka, tearing apart portraits of President Bashar al-Assad. YPG fighters also opened fire on government positions. Hasaka is a divided city. The Kurds are taking over more areas, while government troops are confined to military bases and garrisons. Syrian army artillery has also been pounding Kurdish positions aimed at halting the YPG advance. Families are fleeing to safety from the fighting nearby. Schools in the city of Qamishli have become makeshift refugee camps to cope with the growing number of displaced people.
I fled Hasaka when Syrian jets were striking civilian areas. I gave birth to my baby boy on the way to here. It was very painful. I don't know what will happen to us next.
The Kurds have gained more territory since the start of the war. Now they are in control of a large area stretching from Hasaka in northeastern Syria all the way to Afrin north of Aleppo. Al-Bab and Jarablus remain under ISIL control. It's all part of what is in effect an autonomous Kurdish region known as Rojava. The Turkish army shelled Kurdish positions in Syria in the past, accusing the YPG of being an extension of the PKK, which the Turkish government considers a terrorist organization. The latest push by the Kurds to take over Hasaka is likely to further increase Turkey's concerns.
If it's too hot for me, it's too hot for the bees.
Once a week, amateur beekeeper Sarah Wallbank inspects her hive.
Pardon me. There you are. Everybody clear?
To ensure the tens of thousands of honeybees she tends to continue to thrive.
I'm looking for any signs of disease.
Earlier this summer, she noticed her bees flying at night, unusual behavior for the species, smashing into her porch light and dying.
Doesn't seem natural. It doesn't seem right what they're doing. So that's when I started doing the research.
Wallbank collected the dead bees, sometimes dozens each morning, sent them for testing, and learned she had zombie bees, the first reported case in Canada.
That little brown thing, that's the empty cocoon.
The bees are infected when the tiny phorid fly lays an egg right in the back of the bee.
That egg hatches out, and then the larva crawls around inside eating all of the bee flesh, including the brain, right? And that's, you know, I mean, you can imagine how crazy that would make you.
So you think you've got what it takes to be a zombie hunter?
The term was coined by this San Francisco researcher in 2012. He's behind the website Zombie Watch, tracking infected bees across North America to try and find out just how serious the issue is.
It is unfortunate that these labels tend to sensationalize the issue.
This BC bee expert says worrying about the bee population is important because the pollinators are integral to crop health. But right now, zombie bees are not a major threat.
It could be that in the future some of these phorid flies can affect more bees than we currently are aware of, but that is mostly under circumstances where the bees are already weakened.
They're just so active.
And with colonies dying from mites, fungal disease, and pesticides, this is just one more threat that keeps Wallbank as busy as her bees.
Ballistic missile has been fired from a submarine there in the face of the massive war games that are ongoing on the Korean Peninsula. Yes, Kim Jong-un finally gets one up. Now, it says here, Sputnik News states that in the latest missile test, North Korea has reportedly launched a projectile from a submarine. That is according to South Korea's Yonhap News Agency. They state here that the launch occurred from a vessel in the Sea of Japan, just off of North Korea's eastern coast, and that is according to officials with South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff who reported this to Yonhap News. They state here that the test comes one day after the United States and South Korea launched joint military exercises on the peninsula. Pyongyang had warned against the drills, threatening to launch a preemptive nuclear strike. Now, it states here that the DPRK has test-fired a number of ballistic missiles in recent months and has also conducted nuclear tests. Now, we have reported on those tests. We have reported on those multiple launches as well. Of course, the micro-hydrogen bomb, which was claimed by Pyongyang, but there was still called into question by some nuclear scientists around the world, according to the seismic data and the fallout from that test. Now, those tests, of course, were condemned by the international community. Now, there's also been harsh new sanctions placed on North Korea, but the latest reaction is coming out of the Prime Minister Abe of Japan, who has called this ballistic missile test a reckless action. So we're also seeing right now, we've got some stories today regarding Japan and this new aggressive nature that Japan is starting to show. With all the tension in the South China Sea, of course, with the provocations by North Korea, we're seeing a new posturing positioning by Japan. Now, of course, Japan and the United States are allies ever since World War II, ever since we dropped 2 nuclear bombs on 2 of their large cities. But the point is that Japan is becoming more aggressive, and we might see some provocations against China in the very near future. China, of course, weaponizing those South China Sea islands.